So instead of applying to a million different jobs, like trying to send out 100 job applications, I applied to 10 jobs. I wrote super tailored resumes and cover letters because I didn't have the time to really network and build out this huge network. I did start to network, but that's not what ended up landing me in a job. I applied online to a job. I was one out of 132 online applicants. They like cherry picked my resume out because of the way I was selling myself and telling a story. And it was interesting because that first supervisor who hired me, she quoted the opening line of my cover letter 6 months after I was hired off the top of her head because she said it spoke so directly to her needs. It's like I had dissected the job description, which I had, to really show her how I can add value.
I'm really excited for our show today. So I think we all need, every once in a while, we all need a little bit of a career booster shot. Really some time to sit back and think about, am I in the right career? Am I in the right job? What do I want to do next? And I think there's probably no better time to do that than right now as the pandemic is ending and people are really thinking about what really matters to them. So to guide us on our conversation today, I've got Jette Stubbs helping us today. Jette Stubbs is a career and business coach. She's also the podcast host for Happy Career Formula. And Jette's got an amazing story about her challenges finding a job and how she learned a formula that worked really well for her. And now she coaches folks on how to do that better. So whether you want to become an entrepreneur and do your own thing, or you're just looking for a job that's going to fit your current needs a little bit better, Jette's got some great perspective. So take some real care to listen to her. She's got a wonderful Venn diagram. And of course, at the end of our conversation, I will share with you all the mini notes I took.
The Workplace Therapist Show is sponsored by the Leadership Foundry. Bringing a cutting-edge, real-world approach to leadership development, the Leadership Foundry partners with each client organization to create a custom-tailored experience, virtual or in person, that combines innovative leadership content, world-class facilitators, and one-on-one coaching to ensure your leaders have everything they need to grow and thrive. To find out more and to design your one-of-a-kind program, visit myleadershipfoundry.com.
Jette, I am so excited to have you on the show today. I'm really excited about our conversation today. I'm really excited to have you kind of share some of your guidance around career with us today. So before we kind of jump into all the nitty gritty of advice and how we can think about steering our careers, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and share a little bit more about you with our listeners. So what kind of the journey that kind of got you in this place of being so passionate about kind of career alignment?
So now today I'm a career and business coach, but when it started when I had 90 days to find a job or leave the country. I was an international student in Canada and I didn't have any family in the country. When I went off to university, my parents had stayed for 3 days and then left. So I was in the country by myself. I was in the situation where I needed a work permit to get a job, but I needed a letter from my university to get the work permit. I needed to pay off tuition so I could get the letter from the university. So it was this cyclical, that vicious cycle you can get trapped in. And I had 90 days to figure it out. I wanted to stay in Canada and I needed to learn how to sell myself. I knew I had a ton of skills. I had the good education. I had received good grades. I volunteered. I got internships and I sent out hundreds of applications and I got zero responses.
Wow.
So I was devastated. I was confused. I thought I did what I was supposed to do. Education plus experience plus hard work will equal success. Somebody will give you a chance, give you an opportunity, and then you'll be able to advance within a company and they'll give you a chance to grow. And I realized that just wasn't the case. So I had to rethink how I was selling myself very, very quickly. So I took in all of these different resources, every newcomer workshop I could find, every free clothing store that was giving away clothing for newcomers, anything that I could find. And then I realized there was all of this conflicting advice on how to develop your career. Somebody would say, oh, you should apply online. Other people should say you should network. Other people would say, oh, you should tap into your connections. But I didn't have any connections to tap into. So I wasn't sure how to make it happen and make it a reality for myself. But I did start to see patterns in what some people were saying. I
Mm.
started to see patterns in adding value, solving problems. But when I first started, those words were so abstract. Like, I don't know what that means to add value to an organization. I don't know what that means to solve a problem. How do I find the problems that they want to solve? How do I go and speak to an employer or hiring manager and figure that out? So I built out a system to build out a career that aligns with who I am. Because one of the things that I started to realize during that process was I had a really deep fear of being stuck in a dead end 9 to 5 job in Canada, not knowing how to make it work, not knowing how to pull the pieces together, being terrified of being stuck paying off tuition debt, being stuck never being able to afford to visit my family, and not knowing how to build out that good career that we're all promised after we put in all of this hard work and education. So the next thing that I did was I took my response rate from a 0% response rate to a 70% response rate. So from
Wow.
a 0% response rate to over 100 job applications to a 70% response rate to 10 job applications. So I landed a job that I loved in a field that I loved, in the city that I wanted, in the field that I wanted, in the exact company that I wanted to work in, but not the like perfect department. But it was all very close, making more money than I had targeted.
Wow.
I really shifted how I sold myself so I could access better opportunities. But then I faced different obstacles. So in my first 18 months on the job, a lot of things happened. So my mother was stabbed 17 times in a robbery. My
Mm.
initial supervisor was racist. I used to make a buzzer noise like Jeopardy every time I said something that sounded like I was from a foreign country. And because I was from a foreign country, that was a lot of words. And she would do
Mm.
that even if I was doing a presentation in front of like 30 or 40 or 50 people. She would interrupt the presentation, make the buzzer noise, correct me, and repeat the buzzer until I said the word, so that I didn't, in her words, sound like I was coming from the poor parts of the country and the poor parts of the world. So
Wow.
I was dealing with all of this while I was in a new city without any friends. I had moved from the city where I went to university to a new city in Toronto where I had no friends. I had to rebuild connections, and everything was just starting to fall apart for me. And in where I was working, they typically refer to young staff as people 25 to 30. At the time, I was 21. And I had a full year before I would turn 22. I just turned 21. So I was younger than most people. I already look young for my age. And I found that I was in an environment where I was constantly battling to prove myself every time I walked into a room.
Mm.
So every time that I entered a meeting, I'd have somebody ask, oh, are you the right person to speak to? But it would sometimes go way beyond that to sometimes I had people legitimately refuse to continue the meeting because they said there is no way I could be the right person to speak to for partnerships for this organization. I just looked too young. I didn't look the part. And so they needed to speak to my supervisor, who happened to be somebody very, very high up in the organization. I said, really, do you want me to pull this person in? They're like, yes, because it couldn't be you. So
Wow.
I had somebody say this to my face, refuse to meet with me. Thankfully, I did have a very supportive second supervisor. Like they cut out my initial supervisor who was discriminating against me, and they gave me a new supervisor. And that supervisor was incredibly supportive, came in and said, hey, if you don't want to speak to her, you can ask me the questions, but I'm going to ask all the questions back to her because I'm not the expert in this. She is. And having that sort of supportive relationship was huge, but it didn't change the fact that the environment was really toxic and my body started to break down. I started stress vomiting, and I really needed to find a way to make my career work for me. That's when I realized I needed to build out a career that lines with me and my life and my life situation
Yeah.
and design my career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a story, Jette. That's awesome. Okay, so I want to go back to a couple pieces of it because you said there was a couple big pivot points that I would love to kind of dig in on. So
Mhm.
I want to go back to the first one. You talked about the early stage when you're looking for a job. You're sending out 100 applications. You're getting 0 responses. You're going and getting all this advice from people, and it's conflicting advice. They're saying apply online, network, tap into your contacts, and you didn't have any. And then you start to see some patterns in there, and then something happened which had you go from 0 to 70 in response rate. What did you learn there? What was some of the things that you started to do differently that helped make that pivot for you?
So one of the things that I did was I wrote down my goals. So I said, I don't want just any job. I want a happy career. And that phrase happy career has now stuck. It's the name of my podcast, Happy Career Formula. But I I wrote down what I wanted out of life because I realized I didn't want just any job. I wanted a career that would support my life goals. And this was the first time in my life I really focused on that instead of doing the education plus experience plus hard work path. I set out my life goals in the different areas of my life. So I said I would ideally like to have 3 weeks vacation plus have 2 weeks off for the holidays. I want one of those companies that shuts down for the holidays so I could visit my family and then still be able to visit other parts of the world during the rest of my vacation time. I would like something that supported me in continuing my education. So at that point, I just finished my bachelor's degree. I wanted to go and do a master's degree. And at the time, I was a first generation student. So my family, my parents had never went to university. I had a professor sit me down and say, hey, this is how university works. You should go and do a master's. This is why. And based on his advice, I wanted to continue, but I couldn't afford it. So I wanted an organization that would support me and give me the flexibility to do that. I went through all of the areas of my life, like physical, emotional, relationships, spiritual well-being, all of those different areas, financial, and I set targets for what I would want to live my ideal lifestyle now, and then what I would want in the future, and what could be steps to help me get there. So that's what I call desire, like what you want out of life, how your life can come together. And it's not about saying when I achieve X, I'll be happy, or when I achieve the big house, I'll be happy. It's about building a career that aligns with who you are, and in creating things that you enjoy on a weekly basis, on a daily basis. So you're enjoying the journey instead of waiting until you get to a destination to achieve happiness. That was really important for me. The second piece was I looked at my skills. So what skills do I have that I enjoy using? I figured if I'm going to be at a job every day or like 9 to 5, Monday to Fridays, and realistically, a lot of us work a lot more than that. So I wanted something that I would enjoy doing during the day. I wasn't sure what that was because there's so many things that you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what career options are out there that you haven't considered, what business options are out there, what freelance service ideas that you haven't considered yet. So I said, okay, how can I start to explore these things that I haven't heard of or considered before so that I can start to identify real market demand and find ways to make money? So I did a pros and cons list of my previous experience. I said, based on my academic experience, I studied business and sociology as a double major with a certificate in community development. And I went through all of these different topics. Initially, I typed in like business, sociology, community development, jobs. That didn't work. And then I started to look at subtopics. So which subtopics under the fields that I studied did I like? Which things did I like when I did my internship? So I realized I really loved training and development. I really liked teaching, even since primary school when I used to teach and I used to volunteer to teach. I loved that. That was a consistent thing within my life and my career development so far that I truly enjoyed doing. So I wanted to incorporate more of that. I really love strategy courses. So when I took my business strategy course in university, one of the things that I did was I actually took it over from the team. We had a team of 4 and I said, hey, you all aren't really doing this work or reading the assignments. I'm really enjoying this. Let me just do all of the work for the team. And it was a competition where we placed 3rd place and I was the only person that was a solo team. And I just shared the credit with everybody because I had accepted that. But I just loved strategy so much. So I loved helping people connect the dots to build a strategy to where they want to go. And then I loved helping people bridge the gap between academics and understanding how that applies to real world theory. Because I realized I was in my 20s and everybody around me was struggling with this. So maybe I could combine these different things. So I typed in all these different keywords, and this is now what I call like a market demand or a job search or business idea rabbit hole. It's like Alice in Wonderland. You go down the rabbit hole and you end up in this whole new environment that you just didn't see. It's also very similar for a digital age when you go into YouTube and you start in one place and then 2 hours later you're still there but you're someplace totally different. So I use this framework: desire plus skill plus demand. So demand is other people's desires. Each one of us have a tension between where we are now and where we want to be in life. I have this tension, you have this tension, Brandon. Companies have this tension between where they want to be now and where they want to be in the future. And anytime that you're paying for something, you're paying to help fill in that gap for somebody. So when you pay for a Netflix subscription, you pay for entertainment. If you pay for guitar lessons, you're paying to pursue your passion. If you're paying to get a table in your office, you're paying for a functional purpose to help you get closer to where you want to go. So I needed to start to identify the gaps that I could start to fill in. And that is the third component. So I look at it as a Venn diagram. You have your desire, you have your skills, and your demand. And if you're just attaching your skills to demand, you're going to be a very unhappy professional because you're not getting what you want out of life. You could be making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, but you're not getting the life that you want from it. So you're probably pretty unhappy in your career. And if you are attaching your skills to what you want out of life, but you're not tying it to real world market demand, you're probably going to end up a starving artist or like a do-gooder missionary where you're struggling to pay the bills because you're not talking about how you add value. And a
Yeah.
lot of people in the creative space will think about that and they'll say, okay, well, I don't know how to bridge that gap. Even in the creative space, if you're an artist, if you are a musician, you're still creating connection for people, and that is adding value, but you need to tell that story. And if you are just attaching what you want out of life, so your desires, to other people's desires, which is market demand, you'll end up a dreamer who doesn't have the skills to execute on that dream, and you'll need to build out a
Mm.
plan to achieve those goals. So that's the framework that I use. And I started to tell a story about how I fill in that gap for people by saying, this is where you are now. This is the steps or the skills, qualifications, and experience I will bring in to help you get to where you want to go. That's the conversation that I had on my resume, on my cover letter, and interviews, and when I started freelancing and starting my own business.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So what I love about that Venn diagram you've got is, the first, as I'm hearing you talk, what was coming to my mind was the first two were so much about learning about yourself, really thinking about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What am I looking for? That desire piece, whether it's work-life balance or continuing education or more vacation time, whatever it is. The skills, what are the skills that I bring to the table? All very important. You're taking an inventory. But I think the
Mm-hmm.
secret sauce was that last one, was demand, was when you started to say, so what are things that people are looking for that they would pay people to do? And I love the way you said it. You said, whenever you're paying someone to help you get to where you want to go, right? So I'm hiring someone because I got these goals, whether I'm an organization or I'm a entrepreneur or whatever happens to be. I've got these goals and I need help getting there. So I'm hiring people to help me get there. So learning about understanding that demand part, I think sounds like that was the key. So when you put all three together, is that what helped you go from kind of that 0 to 70?
Exactly. So instead of applying to a million different jobs, like trying to send out 100 job applications, I applied to 10 jobs. I wrote super tailored resumes and cover letters because I didn't have the time to really network and build out this huge network. I did start to network, but that's not what ended up landing me in a job. I applied online to a job. I was one out of 132 online applicants. They like cherry picked my resume out because of the way I was selling myself and telling a story. And it was interesting because that first supervisor who hired me, she quoted the opening line of my cover letter 6 months after I was hired off the top of her head because she said it spoke so directly to her needs. It's like I had dissected the job description, which I had, to really show her how I can add value.
That's fantastic. Okay, so Jet, I love this because you gave us a nice way to think about if we're trying to look for something, whether we're right out of university or we're somewhere in mid-career, how do we really think about that? And again, I can't emphasize it enough. That last piece where we're thinking about what's the demand, what's the need, and attaching to that, because I think so often when people do job searches, they spend all their time talking about themselves. Like, these are
Yes.
my skills, now hire me. I had several years ago, I did work with Saks Fifth Avenue, which is a luxury retailer, and they talked about when e-commerce came and changed their business. They said, we had to change our culture completely. We had to go from a clerking culture to a clienteling culture. A clerking culture is like the old school way of thinking about resumes. You sit back and you say, how can I help you? Right? It's like, here I am, hire me and I'll do some things for you. But clienteling is when you go up to somebody and say, oh my gosh, you'd look amazing in this, which is a lot more of what you did. You're like, here's all the ways I can help you. And I know what you need. So I think that's like a great story. So I want to pivot our conversation a little bit because I know you help so many different professionals navigate their careers and think about it.
Yes.
So what are you hearing right now as people are coming out of the pandemic? What are you hearing people struggling with? What are some of the common questions they're asking you?
There's a lot of questions about how to continue working remotely post-pandemic. Another common question that I'm being asked is people are just starting to reckon with the lives that they're building for yourselves. When you are stuck in your home, you can't go anywhere, you have a lot of time to think, you start to question the type of life that you're building for yourself. What are you really pursuing? What do you really value? And all of the road rage that you used to have in on your morning commute dissipates, right? And you start to think, okay, well, what was really important? What should I have been focusing on instead of that road rage in the morning? How can I build a better relationship with my kids now that I have this extra time? How can I take care of myself better? This The flexibility that you get when you get your time back and you have that flexibility during the day to spend 15 minutes doing a bit of self-care because you're not in an office surrounded by people, it really makes you start to question,
Mm.
well, could I do this on an ongoing basis? Because I could I create this flexibility for myself in on an ongoing basis and have a job potentially, if I take on a promotion that pays me more and that is less stressful? Is that a reality? Is it a possibility? I think the biggest thing that it's doing right now is making people question what's possible.
So what I love about that is I'm going back to your Venn diagram. So that's a lot about desire, right? It's
Exactly.
how did this change my desire? So I think the real art in this is how do you convince employers that you can still meet their demands while
Mhm.
doing it in a way that still meets your desires? How do we do that? Because I think that's part of the things people are wrestling with. Some employers are saying, "Oh gosh, you can work from home now; it's okay." Others are saying, "No, no, no. On this date, December 1st, whatever it is, we want people back in the office." So how do you navigate those conversations, or how do you think we should approach it?
So the first thing you definitely need to do is map out your desires. Like, what do you want in the different areas of your life? Now, let's say you've done that, you've got a solid grasp on where you want to go and what you want your life to look like. The next piece is to look at different types of market demand. So you go through that job search rabbit hole or that market demand rabbit hole, and you type in different keywords into Google, exploring what your next step could be. So you find keywords on Google based on your previous experiences, and you find a group of job descriptions that start to interest you. Then you need to dissect the different values of those organizations. You don't want a butts and seats type of organization because that organization is operating from a place of fear. They're worried that if you are not there, they don't know what you were doing, so you may not get your work done, and they're not sure how to manage you.
Mm.
So they think, okay, well, I need you here. We're going to have better conversations in person. Or maybe the manager or the CEO just likes engaging with people in the office place. So they're like, everybody needs to be at the office because that's what I like. And that's the situation that I want. And you need to find an environment that's more flexible. So you need to look at your values, and then you need to make a major shift in how you're selling yourself. So just like you said, Brandon, a lot of people say,
Mm.
okay, this is my skills. This is what I've done in the past. Now tell me what to do. That's what their resume is saying. This is a list of tasks and duties that I've done in the past. They need to make a shift from that approach to acknowledging the gap that you're filling for an organization. So every job description that's out there is basically saying, we have this gap that we need to be filled for our organization. This is how we need help. This is the skills, qualifications, and experience we think you need to solve this problem. Can you apply and show us how you can help us add value to our organization and get to where we want to go. So your resume, your cover letter, your interview needs to be a process of saying, this is how I can fill this gap. Your resume should be a history of solving similar problems and bringing transferable skills from the different things that you've done to help fill in that gap for people. And there's a framework that you can Google that's really easy to find. It's called the CAR or STAR framework, where you can say, this is the challenge, this is where you are at right now as an organization. This is the action that I will take, the skills, qualifications, and experience that I will bring to the table. And this is the result in ideally a quantifiable way. So instead of saying I increase sales by 20%. Instead of saying I improved employee morale, say we went from a 70% turnover rate to a 30% turnover rate for employees. Start to make that shift in how you were talking about yourself and talk to the employer as though you are having a discussion with them about how you can add value. So many times when people get into an interview, they are so nervous and they're afraid, oh, this person is judging me. And there's a direct correlation between fear in an interview and like financial outcomes and success. So you want to make that shift from saying, oh, this person is judging me, everybody at this table is judging me, or everybody on the video call now is judging me, to saying, I'm going to get up, get to the other side of the table and have a conversation with that employer about how I can partner with them to achieve their goals and get to where they want to go. And that means taking leadership and asking questions. So one of the things I often recommend is go out there and speak to people that are on the teams that you want to work in. So if you're looking at an organization and you're not sure how to transfer your skills, find people who are on LinkedIn. Don't go to the hiring manager or the CEO. Go to the person on those teams and talk to them and say, what are some of the obstacles that your organization is facing right now? Would you mind having a coffee chat with me and giving me some insight into what it's like working with this organization and how you like being there? If you stop approaching the hiring manager and the CEO, what you'll realize is a lot of these other people have very few people approaching them on a regular basis. They're not bombarded with emails the way a hiring manager or a CEO is. So you can go to them and ask specific questions about market demand. And then you can use that conversation and use the exact words that are being used in the job description or being used in the discussion with the employees on that team to then have a conversation with the employer. The interview shifts to be from being a conversation where you feel like you're being judged to a conversation where you are partnering with the employer, using the employer's own words to have a discussion about how you can help them get to where they want to go. And you are deepening your understanding of the problems that they are trying to solve. So I typically recommend people start off interviews by asking questions to make sure they understand the goals that the employer is trying to achieve, because too many people will go through an entire interview without even knowing the actual job that they're interviewing for. They're like, oh, the job description was vague. Well, why didn't you ask questions? Why didn't you clarify that so that you can show how you can add value in a more succinct way and have a tell me about yourself that isn't saying, I graduated here, then I did this, then I did that. But you're saying, I helped solve this type of problem for this type of company by bringing these skills, qualifications, and experience to the table so you can get here.
So I've got one last big question for you. So, and you set it up really well. So you gave some great ideas on how I love that idea of partnering, going to the other side of the table, shoulder to shoulder. How can I work with you to solve this problem? So now the big question I have for you, last big question. How can someone know if they should become a solopreneur or a freelancer? Because that's really then doing this in a real way, because you're really doing that all day long. But it's not for everybody. So how do you guide people around that thought process or that decision? Because it's a little different kind of world when you've got to kind of go out and find your own work on a regular basis. And you get more freedom, but there's a lot more responsibility that comes with that. So what kind of advice do you have for people around that?
So when people are thinking about making that shift, the first thing they often worry about is, one, what is my idea? And two, I'm terrified of selling myself. I'm terrified of sounding pushy, sleazy, salesy, annoying, all those things. So the first thing I'll say is as far as your idea goes, you can take one or two approaches. You can either scale what you're currently doing. So if you have a decade of experience or 15 years of experience in a field and you've had progressive experience, when you're working for an employer, you have one client, your employer. And your biggest risk is if that employer fires you, you lose your one source of income.
Amen.
When you start to...
Amen. 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 I say the same thing, Jet. I say it's like investing in, investing in companies. You're invested all in one company rather than like 10 different
Yes.
companies,
Yeah.
So I love that. Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
No worries. So the second thing is you want to make a shift as you start to grow out a freelance service, become a solopreneur, start a business. You're making a shift to now helping multiple clients and building out systems and teams to support you in serving those clients effectively. And you're going to initially want to get your first few clients. And so that's one way you can scale what you're currently doing. So, for example, for me, I was working in something related to career education in a university space. And then I shifted to doing career coaching. And then I brought in all of the knowledge and experience because my parents were actually entrepreneurs who didn't have access to university education, but built out like $1 million business within by the 90s. And they taught all of these lessons to me about how to become an entrepreneur, how I can never create true wealth for myself if I'm always working for somebody else. But they didn't bring that into the digital age. And so I brought a lot of their lessons that they taught me into the digital age. And that's when I started to talk to people and say, hey, I'm career coaching you, but you have like 10, 15, 20 years of experience. Can I talk to you about how you can start to make this shift into maybe consulting or freelancing or becoming an entrepreneur and scaling from having one client to many clients and having more flexibility? So if you lose that one client, you know where your next set of income is coming from and you're not stuck.
Yeah.
So I would, that's one way of doing it. The other way is to go back to that desire, skill, demand framework and really look at your skills. What are things that you're interested in? What are obstacles that you've overcome in your life that you can help other people overcome? Or what are some goals that you've achieved in your life that you can now teach other people? Or what's something that you're interested in that you can be a leading learner in? So you just stay a few steps ahead of somebody who is trying to get there as well. So you just stay a few steps ahead. You're teaching something that you already love and you just keep on, watching a few YouTube videos, taking a course or two. And within a year, you're 52 weeks of YouTube videos and courses ahead of somebody who's just starting out, which means you can start to make money and capitalize off of that probably well before that year is over by just helping people get that next step quicker so they don't have to spend 52 weeks learning those things. The second piece is selling yourself. So making that mindset shift as you start to shift over to being a freelancer or an entrepreneur to saying, I am not being pushy or salesy. Every time we think of selling, we think of that greasy salesperson that we don't want to interact with. But we buy things so often that we are so excited to buy. I always say when a waiter comes to you and hands you a menu, are you upset that they're asking you to buy food? No, you'd be upset if they didn't hand you the menu. That's when you'd want to walk out of the restaurant. If you spent an hour waiting for a menu, you'd be upset. So start to ask people to buy from you. So many people will say, oh, my freelance service business is struggling. Oh, I'm not getting any money. Did you ask anybody to buy from you? Did you hand them a menu and say, this is how I can help you get closer to your goals? A waiter is saying, this is how I can help fill your belly, right?
Yeah.
So how can you shift that discussion and make that happen for yourself? And then don't think it has to be this big leap. There's this myth that becoming a freelancer, an entrepreneur is this big leap. You have to quit your job from burnout. Honestly, that's what I ended up doing. I don't recommend it. If you are truly burnt out and you physically cannot work anymore, see if you can shift into a job that you love more. See if you can shift into doing work that you really like and then build out your freelance service over time. Build out a plan, start to get mentorship and coaching while you have that disposable income through your salary to supplement that.
Yeah.
And then use that to build out your business more quickly. And then once you've got like 3 to 6 months of stable replacement of your income, higher income, and you can't do the freelance service anymore within your free time, then start to think about quitting your job and keeping some savings aside so that you have some flexibility. You don't want to be living paycheck to paycheck on a freelance gig and quitting your job. You want to have some flexibility so you know where the money's coming from.
Yeah, Jet, that was great. So we're already getting close here to the end. So I ask all my guests this question. What's one life hack you have for us that can help us either to have better conversations or build better relationships at work or at home?
So as I mentioned earlier, we all have this tension between where we are now and where we want to be. And a lot of us think we just need to build out our experience, education, plus experience plus hard work. And you really need to make this mindset shift from knowing the problems that people or companies care about, that they're willing to pay for, and then asking for what you want to be compensated in
Mm.
return. So a lot of times we think about like big names, like we'll talk
Mm.
about Mark Zuckerberg, who quit his Ivy League education and then decided he's going to start out his business. And we'll be like, oh yeah, well, maybe you don't need a degree. What he really focused on was saying, hey, I have this amazing problem that a bunch of people seem to be buying into. Let me negotiate this and build it out so that I can be compensated what I want, so I don't need to go for the traditional education route. So understanding how to create that flexibility for yourself is huge. But that conversation goes beyond the workplace and it goes beyond money. When you're talking with your spouse, what is the life that your spouse wants to live? Do you have that transparent conversation? And do you ask, okay, if I help you get there, can I get this in return? And have that open conversation where you're discussing your relationship dynamics, you're discussing your goals, and you're not just assuming, okay, well, if I show up, I'm here, I'm doing enough. You need to ask everybody in your life, where are they trying to go? What's the tension between where they are now and where they want to be? And then work to help them fill in that gap.
That's great. So if people want to learn more about you or follow you, where can they go?
So I have a podcast too, Brandon. It's called Happy Career Formula with Jette Stubbs. And if you like the lessons that I taught here today, I'd recommend you start with episode 2 and 3. Episode 2, I talk about like detailed of the Venn diagram, the desire, skill, demand framework, which is what I call the happy career formula. And episode 1 has my story in detail, if that was what compelled you or what interested you. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Jette Stubbs. Feel free to connect or follow me. And I have a quiz. So if you go to my website, jettestubbs.com/quiz, I help you identify which stage you are at in professional growth, whether that's the job, freelance service, or a business, and what are the top 3 obstacles that you're facing at each step of the way so that you can start to fill in that gap and reduce that tension for yourself.
Jette, this was great. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I took lots of notes, and I'm so thrilled with the work you're doing. So keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you got as much out of that conversation as I did. I've got a whole page of notes here from Jette. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to hit a couple highlights. I love, first of all, her journey and how she couldn't get anyone to bite in her job search, and then she started having some aha moments. And she came up with this in a very simple Venn diagram, thinking about your desire. So what's the lifestyle things you want? We can all think about that right now. How much commuting time do we want to do? How much time do we want for self-care? All those kinds of things. Then she talks about skills. What are my skills that I bring to the table? And then I think the special secret sauce is the last one, market demand. So what are people needing right now? And I love that she reminds us that whenever someone hires an employee or we hire somebody, we're paying someone to help us get to where we want to go, right? So we've got some kind of goals, a need, and we're paying someone to help us get there. So she really encourages us to figure that out. What are we trying to do, and how can we help someone else get to where they want to go? At the very end, she talks about even having those as conversations with your spouse, like even talk to your partner and say, where do you want to go in your career and how and life, frankly, and how can I help you get there? She also helped us kind of think a little bit about how do you position yourself. She used that simple kind of car formula, what's the challenge that they're facing, what are the actions that I can take, and the results that we might kind of deliver. And then finally, she says, she gives us this question to think about, how can I partner with them, again, to help them think about where they want to go, and ask them lots of questions about that. Don't just assume and guess. She said so many people go into interviews and not even really realizing what job they're interviewing for. They didn't spend enough time asking. So I think those are all great ideas for us to remind us as we're moving forward to think about truly not only what we want, but what others want, and how can we help them get there.
Hey everyone, it's Ingrid Schmidt, producer for the Workplace Therapist Show. I wanted to take a minute to say thank you to everyone who's left a comment or review for the podcast. It means so much and gives us great feedback about how we can improve the show so that we can keep bringing you great content to help you in your daily life, at work, and beyond. Today's review is from Chief Joy Coach. They say, if you don't learn something from Brandon's guests, you aren't paying attention. I always gain something meaningful to reflect on and a practical tip or strategy to try. I highly recommend listening to gain insights for your growth as a leader. Thanks for a great review, Chief Joy Coach, and thank you for listening.